Welcome to the BeWell program. My name is Dr. Ted Bender. I'm a clinical psychologist and the CEO of the BeWell Network. If you or a loved one is struggling, please visit BeWellRecovery.com. Our number is 866-317-8395. My goal is to educate and help many struggling with mental health. There is help for the many life obstacles we endure. Today, I am pleased to interview and honored, and I'm going to geek out a little bit here. John Salley is on the show today. I grew up in Troy, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. I was born in Detroit, and I grew up in the fandom of the Bad Boys era, watching the Pistons win back-to-back championships with my favorite team of all time. My mother and my aunt will totally freak out when they're watching this video, by the way. I have the Spider on the show today, so John Salley, thank you so much for being here.
Man, thank you very much, Doc. And I appreciate that. In other words, people out there need to know he grew up in the 1900s.
So, John Salley is a former NBA star, one of the first players in the NBA history to win championships with 3 franchises, as well as the first player in NBA to win a championship in 3 different decades. He's since been joined in that category by Tim Duncan. Today, though, you are an actor and an advocate for overall health, but also an active advocate for mental health. Can we talk a little bit about that and what brought you to that space?
Yeah, Chuck Daly, God rest his soul, was the coach of the Bad Boys. He used to say I had the best mental health of any athlete he's ever seen. And he's saying this in 1988, 1989. I'm not understanding what that means.
Yeah.
And one of the things you remember, Bill Lambier, who was the center of the Pistons and one of our captains, people used to call him a whiner, and he would yell at the refs, and they called him all kind of things. If something was not happening with Bill on court, and if it was a mistake, Chuck would jump up and come down to me and yell at me, and I would nod, and he would say something, and he would be saying something, and he would go and sit back down. And everybody on the bench would be like, why are you yelling at you? I said, because he can't yell at Bill. Like, certain guys can take certain kind of criticisms. Me, I understand, life keeps moving. And coaches yell, and players supposed to play, and coaches supposed to get in their head and motivate them. I was motivated by the fact that I don't like to lose.
Yeah.
So I'm a different situation.
So you had that internal drive, and you were able to kind of let those external forces or any kind of negative criticism roll off your shoulder, whereas other players may not have been able to do so.
And they still can't. Like, I see a lot of guys are very sensitive. They answer to calls. I remember I had a teammate who used to get a clip service. So back in the day, we only had fax machines.
Yeah.
And he would get a clip service if his name showed up, and he would read all the articles. One, I stopped reading the newspaper from the back, and that's where the sports was. 2, I don't watch sports, television or radio. And the reason I think that was the blessing is once I was off the court and out of work, I was into my life.
Yeah.
Everybody else, that was their life. And it's never mind. It was just an aspect of it.
So you were able to kind of shut it down and divide work and home life by not listening to all the criticisms or the nonstop talk radio back then, or the newspaper clippings. And do you think that helped kind of keep you on a good path mentally during your career?
100%. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
And some people may not like that quote or that quote, but it is. When you're just laying back and you don't know anything and you're just relaxed and you have no worries, then you're in bliss. When you sit around, and I tell athletes this, if you're listening to a guy who is watching who can't do one thing you can do, and you take his criticism compared about what he's seen or what he believes you should do, then you're letting in the enemy. You're letting in yoga, we call it monkey mind. And when you're in yoga and you're in meditation and you're holding your pose, you have to focus on your breath. You should be focused on one thing. When you're focused on other things, worrying about what this guy is saying, what this place is like, that's not going to change what is. So.
And during your career, I'm sure you saw a lot of guys who didn't have that ability.
Yeah.
What did that do to their mental health? Like, how did it mess with their game?
It made them losers.
Yeah.
Is why I'm such a winner. and I mean that. Like, I said, I watched. I was on Michael Jordan's Last Dance.
Yep.
And I didn't know when they interviewed me. They said, "What you're being interviewed about, you can't talk about." And I said, when I leave here, I'm not even going to remember meeting you guys.
Right.
Like, I do interviews all the time. But then it came out, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I did that interview. I remember." Because MJ was like, Michael Jordan was like, "Make sure you talk to Salley," because I remember a lot.
Yeah.
And I would bring things up, but I don't remember each game. But what I didn't know is if I knew we were in the head of the Chicago Bulls, like I saw in the Last Dance, they would have never won a championship. If we knew we had an edge, but if we knew how much of an edge
That's interesting.
it would have shut them down.
Yeah, thinking back to watching Last Dance and think about what you just said, that's very, very interesting. So what got you into working for and advocating in mental health? How was that path created from your career until now, and why are you so passionate about it?
I would say I got really into health, and I realized, and I look at it different. I believe your gut is your mind, and I believe this is your brain, which is they call it. But I believe everything starts here.
Yeah.
I call it the God organ. So when you are fearful, when you're in love, when you're excited, when you're angry, it all starts in your gut. And when I realized I was 27, I'm 58 now, but when I was 27, I realized the foods we were eating were causing a lot of the problems. And when you're eating death, then you think death. When you're eating resentment and fear, and you're swallowing that from the animal, I believe that is becoming part of us because we're all connected energetically. So that's the first way I got into it. The second way is I just knew, and I would pay attention to the way people were thinking. I believe there's racism still. I believe there's hate and all those different things. But I believe the reason those things are there is because it's passed down mental trauma. And as a man of African descent living in America, I have that trauma inside of me, and it's that fear. Like when the cops drive by, when there's too many white folks in one place, and there's country music, all kind of things that will kick into this fear. And I always paid attention to how people thought. So when I was in Detroit, outside of 8 Mile was $25,000 to have me show up. Inside 8 Mile was free because I felt I was trying to help those disenfranchised move out of that state, out of that idea. And so that's what happened to me. I realized that I was a conduit to helping young Africans living in America out of this trauma.
So your original work and your interest in mental health was to help those who have suffered some form of trauma, whether through racism or culture. That's very interesting. And what are you spending your time mostly these days on and advocating for mental health?
Well, I have a friend named Dr. Dan Rather, and we were going to do a show on this mental health. Like, also joining me, I'm reading your stuff, but Robert Horry, Danny Green, LeBron James all won championships on 3 teams, right?
Yeah.
But Robert Horry, I used to tell Robert Horry, I used to say, you got mental health issues. Like, I used to say, you got anger issues. I used to constantly say that. And he would be like, why do you say that, Sal? I said, because no one realizes that you're like a time bomb. Like, you're like, no one realizes it. But I've been around you quiet guys who, the wrong elbow will set off TNT and will blow this place up. But then Robert, as he retired, literally became more vocal.
Yeah.
But I used to realize he wasn't that vocal, but he would, if anything happened and you want to get in a fight, Robert Ory was the guy to have on
Yeah.
that squad.
So,
And I would say that about Rick Fox too. I would say Rick Fox, man, once it clicks on, there's no stopping him. It's like meta world peace. Everybody's going to get it. What I do now is I'm doing a show just on health and wellness, on how to get to the next day and help other people while you do it. And what I mean by that, Doc, is everybody every day is trying just to get to tomorrow.
That's the truth.
So what can I do to help your tomorrow be better? And I love sports. I love what I've done, but I rather in my adult life help as many people as I possibly can. I don't think I fix anybody, right? That's ego. I just think helping people see a path is what I like to do.
Well, you're doing that right now. You know, again, we talked about, just the fact that you're talking about mental health, and it helps to reduce that stigma. And one thing that I advocate for constantly for our listeners is to really you don't need to differentiate between physical injury and mental health injury anymore. If you break your arm, you go get it fixed. If you're suffering from major depressive disorder, you go get it fixed. You go get it treated. The suicide rates in this country are through the roof. The overdose epidemic has hit all new highs and continues to every year. And the pandemic was the perfect breeding ground for all of that to explode.
Yeah.
Social isolation with economic downturn. And we're just now seeing really the severe ramifications, not only on adults, but also our kids and teens. We're seeing all kinds of rise in anxiety and depression in teens. We're seeing all kinds of rise in digital addiction, which is a whole new frontier of problems. Just, again, the fact that you're advocating for and being present here really does help in that.
The pandemic, man, I didn't realize how the Great Reset really reset. It even changed me, and I'm usually, you can't move me off of, I can stay focused for a long periods of time. That pandemic was no joke, man.
It was not, and I started working for a hospital system during 3 months before the pandemic hit. And it was a very large organization. It was the merging of 3 nonprofit mental health community companies into one right during the middle of all that. And we had to switch gears about 6 months in and just focus on our own employees.
Oh.
We turned inwards and started offering all kinds of mental health support to our team, because we were working with doctors and nurses who were in those infectious units, long hours, 80-hour weeks. It was crazy. I think, another question that came to me when I was thinking about today's interview with you is, to get to the level that you have achieved, you obviously have to be one of the best athletes in the world.
I agree.
Peak physical condition. Right?
I agree.
But don't you also have to, are there athletes out there that have reached levels of success like that you have, that just don't have it going on up here or have severe mental health problems? I've always wondered, how do you combine some of that, you're mentioning, seeing red only aggression in some of these players. How do they get to that level while still having a lot of these severe or difficult mental health issues? How does that happen at the same time? I've always been curious.
I think they've been cuddled, and I think they've been protected. And then you see it as it gets to a point, and then all of a sudden you see the complete unraveling. It's the caretakers that have been pushing things under the carpet, or hiding it, or using their power not to have it released. But so many, I realize, I'm not going to say the teams. I played on 5 teams.
Yeah.
I had a lot of teammates who were bipolar.
Yeah.
And back when it was a joke, when they were like, "Oh my God, you're bipolar," it was. But now it's not.
Yeah.
It never was. But when they made it a fun thing, saying I can be hot and cold, I can be, But I realized there were guys who couldn't, I guess, gauge. We would have to see how they were going to be that morning. Meaning how they were going to be that. And you would see guys who couldn't calm down, who couldn't stay away from the referees, who had to say something, who had to keep going. When they're using it, like my boy Draymond Green knows how to get in the head of the player and the ref. And if he can keep them occupied with him and not on the game plan, he's winning. That's why I love Draymond Green. That's why I said this guy is an unbelievable manipulator of space and time. But just some guys just, and a lot of people you would see, and I can give an example. You see a guy who's great in college, and then he doesn't make it in the pros. He doesn't have the mental capacity.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, you mentioned bipolar disorder, and for our listeners who are out there, bipolar disorder is a very severe mental health disorder. It can be managed with proper treatment, but if left untreated, which it sounds like a lot of the guys you knew were, it blows my mind that they're out there playing at that level.
Football players.
Yeah, it blows my mind that they can play at that level with that level of mental health disorder.
I'm going to say why I say when I just yelled at football players, do you have to race car driving is the best way of looking at somebody who can focus for long periods of time.
For sure.
Tennis and golf come behind that, or swimming, but football players are putting their body and life on the line each second, and they have to switch into being a killer, and then they want them to be civilians after the end of the game.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
Can't get to that. And then getting hit in your head and having concussions on top of trying to focus that way. Now you have PTSD, and you already had the bipolar situation because they've been training you since you were 6 years old to tear somebody's head off. It's kind of hard to get them to be human when you want them to be savage.
Interesting. I've worked with a lot of veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan earlier in my career, and and veterans today, and for different reasons they have similar issues. Right? You're driving a M1 Abrams tank through Fallujah. That's your job, and then you come back and everyone just expects you to work at a carpet store and selling carpet. All of a sudden, just switch it off and come right back. So athletes kind of suffer from a similar difficulty, it sounds like.
I heard a soldier, every 22 minutes, a soldier commits suicide.
Yeah, that's an area near and dear to my heart. I've worked with the military, the Department of Defense, mostly on research on preventing veteran and active duty suicides, and it's a huge problem. I mean, there was a Time magazine cover years ago which showed it just said one a day, and it had a silhouette of a soldier. We were at a point where we were losing one veteran every single day to suicide in the United States.
It's amazing.
I read another statistic the other day that showed, the amount of combat deaths we've faced in the last 20, 30 years. It was, in the thousands, but the amount of suicides was like 158,000. So just blew the combat death number out of the water. And we even hit a point during Iraq and Afghanistan conflict where we were losing more soldiers to suicide than we were to combat fatalities. In your work advocating for mental health, what are you seeing, especially with kids and young teens these days?
All right, so when I was in Michigan in 1990, I was hired by a hospital in Michigan to go to high schools because there was such a large rate of high school suicides. And I didn't know that, not at all. Like I didn't understand that. I grew up in the crack era, and that was suicide to us, right? Oh man, you got caught on crack, you did crack. But I was going in realizing how many kids, this was in Michigan, per year were committing suicide. So it was always me talking suicide prevention because it wasn't a thing that was in the media. I come here to Los Angeles, and every kid I talked to, the week later, they committed suicide, to the point where I said, maybe I shouldn't be the one speaking to them. And they were like, no, you're doing great. Like, you are our last resort. Like, we've tried everything to get to this point. And even dealing with my own kids who have the sometimes suicidal thoughts, but are saying it. And I said, when we talked about the media, social media, I thought, is it that you're looking at somebody else's life and not valuing yours? My life doesn't look like theirs. And I remember when I took my daughter somewhere and I go, this is we were in Bahamas and I was working with Big 3. And I was able to bring my family, and they were like taking all these pictures. Look what we're doing. We're kicking them. I said, who are you talking to? And they were like, I'm just putting it on Instagram. I go, but the image and what you're saying, you're saying my life is so great. Look at me ball out.
Interesting.
And they were like, yeah. I said, but you're not. You're here on my dime, and I'm working, and you just happen to be by the pool. And they were like, I know, but we're going to play it off like this. And I said, you're not helping anybody doing that. Like, you may be hurting somebody giving out that image.
Interesting. So I never thought about it like that. So it's almost like part of the problem is the comparative nature of look how great my life is.
Yeah.
And then other people who may not have as many privileges or are doing things like that feel bad about themselves.
Right. Now, I understand I used to love watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. That was my favorite show. I got to be friends with Robert Leach before he died. I was on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And that was, okay, to me it was inspiration that I don't have to live in this project that I'm born into.
Gotcha.
I can travel to Europe. I can go to the south of France. I can go to this part of Florida. And it kind of encouraged me. Now you see everybody showing them in Dubai. Oh, we're in Dubai having a great time, and not understanding what that means. So I like that it tells people you should travel, but I don't think it should tell people you have to be wealthy. I like the shows that say, hey, if you go to Thailand, you can do Thailand for $500 for this amount of time. It's a better thing for me to show people that it's still cool to be thrifty and cognizant of your money.
That's interesting. You know, the other aspect that we're seeing in teens and young kids is the bullying aspect online, where, you know, back when we were kids,
you just got bullied at school.
You settled it on the playground, right? These days, you know, and that's an hour or 30 minutes of time when everyone's out around screaming, fight, fight, fight. Nowadays, it's 24/7. Right? They're posting pictures of you or some unflattering shot of you. It's constant 24-hour bullying now.
And it never goes away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then, you know, now working with adults, one thing that we're seeing with, you know, so-called digital addiction. I mean, a lot of people out there, but if you really want to test this, go on your iPhone and check your own screen time averages. If you haven't, you might be surprised of how much time you're spending on your phone. But, you know, I've been working with people spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day glued to that screen.
Yeah, and I remember I said this, I did a show called Name That Tune, the reboot of it, and we shot it in Ireland. And I had to get to the airport early. And when I get there, I guess one of the flights were delayed. And I saw all these people, and I'm standing against the wall. And everybody was on their phone.
Yeah, I know.
Like, every single person. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Even when they're next to one another, they're on their phone sending things to one another. That's another crazy.
I try to be the guy who's not doing that, by the way.
Really?
When I see that on the line.
I remember I pulled the book out one day, and they go, what's that?
What is that? So I want to, you know, I think one thing to touch on too is, you know, personally in my own life, you know, my therapy is the gym. One of the things that Arnold said that always stuck in my mind, success in iron. And I really, I've taken that to heart since I was 18 years old, you know.
Really?
My therapy is definitely with the barbells and the steel. I know you're a big advocate for exercise and improving overall health and mental health, and you're an advocate for veganism and eating healthy. Like you said, it starts in the gut, and I agree with you. And there's a lot of science to back that up as well.
Mind-gut connection.
Yeah. You know, if I could wave a magic wand for all the patients that I see, you know, the three things I would fix for them immediately would be sleep, regular exercise, and healthy eating.
Yes.
If we could fix those three things, half the problems.
Sleep being first. I'm glad you mentioned it first.
It's such an important piece of it. And one thing I tell my 10-year-old son, who's taken an interest in training because he sees me doing it all the time, is I keep saying, what are the three things, Dominic? Eat, sleep, train, Dad.
That's right.
I got him going young. What are you working on these days? What do you got going on?
I have my own show coming out. I've been, you know, doing, I was on Vlad TV for the past 4 years, and people wasn't realizing I was a regular. And what I did is I realized it's important to stay relevant in this world, and he has, Vlad TV has like 5.5 million subscribers.
Oh, excellent.
We talk about a lot. But I didn't want to work for anyone. I only want to work for myself.
Yeah.
So I started the John Salley Block Party. I shoot next week, first show, and then the set looks like a set we have seen before, and I talk about health and wellness. I really only want to talk about things that make you better, feel better. I talk about weight. I got Salt from Salt and Pepper to come on, and she was taking this challenge I have on how you can make yourself healthy. I had it for Charles Barkley, but he took $3 million from Jenny Craig and then ate Jenny Craig, the whole company. But yeah, I went to him and I just realized that my thought of health and wellness with herbs in Detroit. It was the first time I got a colonic from Dr. Jewel Pookram's office and started taking herbs, and I changed my cholesterol, I changed my skin, I changed my weight. And I bought this show to BET, and they wasn't so sure about the weight gain show because, I say weight gain and weight loss is all emotional. So it's that kind of show. It explains things on how I've enhanced myself or how I think I'm enhancing. And I'm just doing everything to try to get to the next day. I'm trying to live as long as possible and be a good example.
Absolutely. You heard it here from John Salley, 4-time NBA champion.
Yes.
Does anyone to take some advice on physical and mental wellness? He's your guy.
Yeah.
John, what advice would you give to people who are out there struggling with mental health issues?
I would tell them to call you.
Me directly.
You directly.
Excellent.
I think the number was 866. I don't remember it off top.
We'll put it back on the screen.
We'll put it back up. No, I literally would say, get out of your ego. And I tell you this to people who want to get healthy and get off a lot of medicines and away from these diseases that are caused by food. I say, you drove the car here, and this is where we are, this is where you are. Give me the keys, sit in the back, I sit inside, let me drive, you just relax. And I say that, and so I would find somebody like you, like the BeWell company, and I would say, all right, I need help. And don't have an ego, so much ego that you won't ask for help.
So many people out there, and for our listeners, feel like reaching out and asking for help is weakness. But it couldn't be further from the truth. Reaching out for help when you need it is one of the greatest acts of strength that we can do. And I agree with John. Don't let your sadness or your anxiety or mental health disorders rule the rest of your life. Get help now. Find the help that you need to overcome these diseases and illnesses and live for a better tomorrow.